Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to talk quickly about how to do the interior, let's see, under the deliverables, these two images here, spatial conditions, black and white photograph, internal spaces depicting the internal material and lighting. Composed with scale figures and background images in Photoshop. So I'm going to give you one example of how to kind of compose this image. So we need two images. I'm just going to draw on one of these quick samples that we did. Maybe this one. Okay. So open it up in Photoshop. So first of all, we want to make it black and white. Again, in the layers panel, click on the little circle with the black and the white under black and white. We're also going to adjust the contrast a little bit. This time I'll use the adjustment exposure. Obviously, more exposure makes it brighter. The offset will deepen the darker images, or the darker parts of the image. And then gamma kind of also controls lightness and darkness. Okay. So then we need to add a couple of things. One of them is a background image. So we can see from this image the light is entering from here, obviously, and it's landing on that surface down there. We want to try and find a background image just of a sky or something like that that kind of matches the direction and orientation of the lighting in our photograph. So I'm just going to Google sky background. Maybe not background. Let's see. We don't want anything too distracting, but maybe, you know, kind of an afternoon image. Try this one. Oh. Oh, it has a watermark. Okay. I don't know. Let's just do this one. So once you find your image, save that image. Then you would just drag that one into the same file. It might be a lot smaller, that's okay. Okay. What we want to do is place this image behind our photograph and then kind of crop out our photograph so we can see it in the background. First of all, our original image is on a layer called background. You can see it's locked by default. To unlock it, just double click. Click OK. Now we should be able to place stuff underneath it. And then, like I said, we need to crop out our image so we can see that background image through it. So I'm going to go back to that image, the photograph, and make a transparency mask. Again, that's the square with the circle in it. Now I can use the paintbrush tool and paint in black and white to make the parts of the photograph disappear. I'm just going to kind of loosely trace out where the outline photo is. Again, you hold Alt and right click and drag to resize the paintbrush. All right. It doesn't have to be perfect, just good enough that those edges aren't distracting. There we go. All right, so now it kind of looks like we have the sky background. Again, we could still resize it if we wanted to. I think it was actually good before. In if we wanted to, say, adjust, so we want the black and white to affect the whole image, obviously. If we want the exposure settings just to, or a separate set of exposure settings to affect either layer, say for example I want to adjust the balance of my background sky, I can make a new adjustment layer and apply it just to that. And the way I apply it to a specific layer is by holding Alt on the keyboard and clicking in between the layers. You see that icon that shows up where my cursor is means that it's applied now to only that layer. And then we can adjust the there we go, something like that. It might be a little too much actually. Okay. Once you have your kind of background image worked out, I'm going to show you a couple other tricks for editing and updating these images. The other thing we need to do is add scale figures. There's no kind of requirement of the scale that you use here. They can be as small as ants, or they can be, you know, as tall as the space. I'm going to look up cutout people. Just Google those words and go to images, and you'll find a whole variety of different images that are already cut out and ready for us to use. So we want to kind of find some scale figures that are more or less gonna fit in the scene. Let's see. We don't want anyone on a playing soccer, or, you know, walking to work with a briefcase, for example. Okay, these ones look okay. Oh, what is this? I just download this image. Okay. And once I have that downloaded, I'll bring it into Photoshop again as well. Press enter. So this one I obviously want on top. And I can rescale it. Oh god, and there we go. So the way I'm rescaling is I use Control-T to transform the image. You can also write, how do you get to it? Image. I'm not sure, but you use the transform command. So Control-T on the keyboard will allow you to rescale, hold Shift to keep it proportional. Okay, and then to crop out the background on this guy, we're again going to use a transparency mask. What I want to do is select all the white stuff around where the people are. I'm going to go up here to the magic wand tool. You can also get there by pressing W on the keyboard. And up at the top we have a couple settings: tolerance and contiguous. I'm going to turn on contiguous. That means that, for example, when I select the background, let's say the color of this woman's purse is pretty close to the background. Because it's contiguous, because that may not be connected to the background, it shouldn't select that image, or that part of the image as well. In other words, it'll only form one continuous outline, or contiguous outline. Okay. All right. And then with our white stuff selected, then we'll go to this selection tool up here. What's this called? Rectangular marquee tool. You can also get there by pressing M. And then right click on your selection and hit select inverse. That's gonna, we had the white stuff selected before, now we have the individual figures selected. And then when I have this, with this selection made, I'm gonna create a transparency mask. And it should automatically create a black and white representation of our selection. So just to get started with, obviously we have a little cleanup work to do, but that's the quick way to get there. Okay. And so then if we kind of pick a person we want, maybe one of these people sitting. These are kind of low res. I wonder if I can get a bigger one. Oh, here we go. There we go. Let's get that one. So, so yeah, it's also important to make sure you select images that have the right resolution. I mean, I think these would work fine, but we're clipping out the ones we actually want, which is not great. Okay, let's bring that one in. All right, that looks pretty good. Press enter to place it. And wow, it's already clipped, so we don't have to do any of that other stuff. So let's say this person's sitting kind of down there, just chilling in the sunshine. The other thing we could do now is add, maybe make it a little bigger. We could add kind of shadows and stuff like that. So the way to do that is I want to make another layer with kind of the outline of this person as my selection. In order to select what this outline is, I can hold Control on the keyboard and click on the layer, and it'll automatically select all the pixels that are like on that layer. Now with that selection made, I'll make a new layer. I'm going to go to the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to fill it with black. There we go, and then press Control D to deselect, or you can also use the marquee tool and click it to deselect. So now we have a separate layer that's just the kind of silhouette of this figure, and we're going to place it underneath, and then we're going to transform it. So on that layer where our shadow is, we'll hit Control T again, and then before I kind of scale it or anything like that, I'm going to right click and select the option Distort. And Distort will allow me to kind of move all the grips independently so that I can just kind of rough out where I think her shadow should be without too much fussing. Back. Probably need to rotate it as well. And we can also use the tool Warp, which will allow us to kind of bend the image a little bit. The transform tool Warp matches our slope again. There we go. And then in order to make that layer look like a real shadow and be like not completely solid black, we just change the opacity of that layer. So we turn it down a little bit. That way we're still kind of seeing some of the, I mean, there's not much information here based on where I placed her, but we're still kind of seeing some of the information of what's in the photograph underneath. And then the other thing I'll do is make this figure black and white. So in this case, I'm going to use the hue and saturation. That's the photo of my scale figure. I'll go to adjustments and select hue and saturation and just turn the saturation down. And then holding Alt on the keyboard, I'll click in between those two layers so it's just being applied to that layer. All right. And the last thing I could do would be to actually kind of paint some highs and lows on this scale figure itself. I'll make another adjustment there's a bunch of different ways to do this, actually. We can also just make a new layer. I'll put that in between. So now it's also being applied to my image. And what that means is if I draw on this layer in black and white with my paintbrush, so I have this layer selected, I have my paintbrush tool out and I'm drawing in black. So because it's applied only to that image or that layer, it's only going to show up on top of that image. We could just kind of darken the scale figure up a little bit. And then, so in this case, I would use the eraser tool to undo anything rather than white. The shape's a little bit better defined and stuff like that. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll change, so with this layer selected, I'll go up to the kind of, this basically affects how like a layer above will, this changes how a layer above in the layers panel will affect a layer below it. So for example, if I have that layer selected where I just painted in black and go to darken, or, well, more darken doesn't do much, we go to multiply or overlay, you can see it's kind of changing the way it affects the layer below it. Linear light. So I don't necessarily know what the best one is, but you can just quickly go through and kind of figure out which one you think makes it read better. So that one is doing pretty good. So it is adding kind of depth to our figure, making her fit within the scene, the lighting fit within the scene a little more, but it's not making it, you know, completely black everywhere. Okay, so there, that should pretty much cover, you know, how far you want to go with each of these images. Just to give you a point of reference, what you would do then is you save the Photoshop file. And you can also save as and save it as a JPEG. Actually, either one will work. And then what I would do is just use Illustrator and place your images in Illustrator. So those JPEGs that you saved out, place them, scale them in order to lay them out on a page, and then export that to PDF to create those drawings for your submission. All right, so that should wrap up this video. I'm going to sign off.